Welcome to Payoff Pitch, Action Network's Major League Baseball betting podcast. I'm Mike Calabrese, joined by Sean Zerillo to break down Game 2 of the Tokyo Series between the defending World Series champions, Los Angeles Dodgers, and the Chicago Cubs. Game 1 of the 2025 season now in the books, a dominating pitching performance really on both sides. Yamamoto scattered 3 hits over 5 innings. He was on a bit of a pitch count. We figured he would get the quick hook through just 72 pitches, but he was incredibly efficient in this one, and the Dodgers bullpen picked up the rest. No hits issued, or no hits allowed, no walks issued, and Tanner Scott comes in, slams the door with a 10-pitch 1-2-3 ninth inning. The other major storyline, of course, no Mookie Betts. Hopefully he gets right as soon as possible, and there's not any lingering effects after this Tokyo series for him. But what were your takeaways from Game 1, Sean?
Freddie Freeman, a late scratch with hip discomfort. Also, the fact that we don't get umpire announcements till 3-4 hours before the game. Unfortunately, for a 6:10 a.m. Eastern start, that was about 2 or 3 in the morning. I think when lineups came out, I believe Freddie was initially in there. I wasn't awake for that. I saw he got scratched, which to me meant he was in there and then they pulled him out. Apparently, had hip discomfort during batting practice. It sounded like there's a chance it may be an oblique injury. So I would say it's likelier than not that Freddie Freeman misses Game 2 of this series. I bet the under. As a result, I'll give out my price targets accordingly, depending on whether he is in or out of the Dodgers lineup. But if Freeman's dealing with an oblique injury, if Betts, is sick, losing 15 pounds, if like something else is going wrong with him, this Dodgers lineup is still very good, even without those guys. They still project, not only is it above average offense, but still is one of the best offenses in baseball just because Ohtani is so elite and they still have other above average hitters around him. But losing Betts, losing Freeman, even if it's for a period of a couple of weeks, they lose Game 2, go 1-1 coming out of this series. Obviously get the extra added rest before the season, really kicks into high gear. But just should say, sitting 1-1, or maybe if they go 2-0 after these series, you have an updated win total. Seems like Betts, Freeman may miss a month each, with respective injuries or illnesses. Could consider taking a shot at the under on their win total at that point if it ends up floating up to, 106 or 106.5 after a 2-0 start.
Here we are on Game 2. Roki Sasaki minus 155 against Justin Steele. The total sitting at 8.5. You get plus money if you go with the over. You talked about park factors here in the Tokyo Dome. Do you still have similar thoughts on this one, regardless of the pitching matchup, that there's just better power alleys, there's potential for more home runs?
Absolutely. Now, the biggest difference in terms of the matchup or the guys actually pitching, Yamamoto is a guy who should suppress homers. He has a pretty high ground ball rate. Sasaki should permit a little bit more homers, probably going to have a higher fly ball rate than a guy like Yamamoto does. But Justin Steele is a guy who neutralizes barrels, doesn't allow any hard contact. One of the best guys at suppressing home runs in all of baseball, whereas Shota Imanaga gives up a lot of fly balls, and as a result is going to be a much bigger threat to give up a lot of home runs. So the pitching, or the guys who are actually pitching, the Dodgers side maybe allowing a higher chance of home runs. The Cubs side, a much more reduced chance of home runs. That I didn't ultimately see a ball leave the yard yesterday. And the games that these teams have played over in Tokyo, going back, to the exhibition games they played against the Hanshin Tigers, there really hasn't been much scoring at all. I don't know if it's a batter's eye issue, guys adjusting to playing in a new park, or hitters just not being caught up to pitchers, right, that we typically see early in the season. Sometimes hitters are a little bit slow to get into things. They also had their spring disrupted, right, for a couple days, and then had to go overseas and started up again, played these exhibition games, had an extra day off in between. So it's been a lot of stopping and starting for these guys. They're not necessarily in the regular season rhythm. I think that could contribute to it. But overall, this park should still play slightly more offensive, about 5% above where you would expect a normal major league park, normal major league run environment, with those power alleys being at about 15%. And as I discussed on the pod yesterday with Grant, it comes as a result of that increased home run factor, which is about 23% above the Japanese average over the past 7 years. But with that, you get a reduction in singles and you get a severe reduction in triples, because there's just not as much room for a ball to get by an outfielder and roll all the way to the wall, and just sit there and allow the runners to go around. So the park plays a little weird with those power alleys. We didn't ultimately see it play out that much today. There were a lot of pop-ups. I think, mentioning the umpire thing is super crucial. The umpire today, Bill Miller, as I said, super pitcher friendly, about 10% favoring in terms of pitchers relative to an average umpire. You saw a lot early on, a lot of called strikes wide and high that they were getting. Mike Estabrook, also a pitcher favoring umpire. He should be behind the dish tomorrow. Better numbers to the under per Bet Labs. Career 55% to the under, 4.4% ROI. I believe Miller's ROI is like half that, 2.2%. So Estabrook historically better to the under, but I think Miller just rates as a more pitcher-friendly umpire, but Estabrook also pitcher-leaning and did knock my total down a little bit. I would have passed on the total for today. Had I known that Miller was umpiring, it probably would have brought me in line with the market around 7.5. Waking up at 5:30 a.m., seeing he was the umpire, at that point, I didn't really want to buy out of the bet, especially knowing that anybody who bet the over wouldn't be able to join me in terms of cashing out. And would have been a pass for me. It's not like there was plus EV, in terms of going to the under at that point. If there was value going to the under, obviously would have bet it. But yeah, just, an awkward dynamic with the early morning start time and not having umpire announcements in advance. But we know for Wednesday's matchup, we do have another pitcher-friendly umpire.
So before you give us your pick for game 2, I went and did a little research on Sasaki. It's a homecoming of sorts. It's actually his hometown's 6 hours away. I thought there were speed trains there in Japan, but apparently you have to switch. There's multiple trains to get all the way up north to Rizu-zen Takata, where he was born and grew up. So an interesting, family dynamic to get everyone down, from the northern part of the country. I'll just ask this: with the sport so easily diagnosed via advanced stats, I mean, you even got into bat speeds in yesterday's episode previewing game 1. Do you ever look at the human interest of, it being a bit of a homecoming, some added pressure perhaps to perform in front of his native country? Does that ever play into, any of your handicaps? Or do you think that's just a fool's errand to try to be, handicapping in a way, trying to get between players' ears emotionally, what they're thinking going into a game?
Yeah, it's so tough to quantify that, right? So it's not something I can put a number on, which is why I'm not going to actively factor it into a model. It may be enough for me to, go off of or onto a bet, right? If guys Mookie Betts yesterday, Mookie Betts dealing with, the illness, had he ultimately played, right? Say he lost 5 pounds, he was feeling a little weak, he played. Well, that there's like a physical ailment that you can decrease his like effectiveness by 5% or 10% or what have you on that day. How would you make that for a mental adjustment for a player? Mathematically, it's kind of tough to gauge that. We know what players look like sometimes when they're playing at less than 100% physically. We don't really know how to quantify what they are, extra locked in or a little bit distracted with, more stuff going on around them, pitching back in your home environment, etc. It's not like he left and came back either, right? He's going back to resuming pitching in Japan. So Sasaki is the best prospect probably on the planet at this point, with the minor leagues being thinned out. I think he's the best overall baseball prospect on the planet before he makes his first major league start. He immediately projects as a top 20 pitcher in baseball. He projects, honestly, very similarly to Justin Steele. And Steele is a better pitcher than Shota Imanaga, who we talked about yesterday. I rate Shota as like the 35th, 40th best pitcher in baseball starter. Steele ranks closer to 15th, and that's roughly where Yamamoto is at. I have Steele. Well, Steele's projected FIP range out there is between 3.4 and 3.6. Sasaki between 3.21 and 4.01 with an average of 3.5. So you take the average of both of those, they're both around 3.5 in terms of an expected FIP projection. So let's break down Sasaki from a little bit more of an interesting angle, because last year his velocity dipped and his strikeout minus walk rate dipped severely in Japan. He made some mechanical adjustments. He was getting more extension on his pitches. An extension improves perceived velocity to hitters. The closer you release the pitch to home plate, the faster it looks like that pitch is coming in. Jared Weaver is a guy I always think about with this. When he pitched, he had the longest extension of any pitch in baseball. I think he was 6'6", but he had really long arms too. And Weaver, even though he was only throwing low 90s, 91, 92 at the time, to the batters, it had an extra 2 or 3 miles an hour of perceived velocity on it. So last year, Sasaki increased his extension by about 6 inches towards home plate, but his velocity actually dipped by 2 miles an hour. So effectively for the hitters, it might have looked the same, but realistically, there is concern because the velocity drop. Was that a mechanical issue, or is he hiding an issue? Yeah, is he hiding injury? And then also, the overall effectiveness did drop, right? I can talk about the fact that the perceived velocity may remain the same, but on his breaking pitches, the splitter, the slider, the velocity came down on those too, which makes those pitches easier to hit. And as a result, his strikeout minus walk rate went from 35%, which is like Spencer Strider, elite of the elite level, to closer to 21%, which is still very good, but not quite top pitcher in baseball level good. And he still has that upside. He still has future multiple time Cy Young upside, best pitcher in baseball upside. The question is whether the velocity is going to come back and whether the Dodgers can develop him to the point where he can throw 170, 200 innings over the course of multiple seasons and remain durable for the length of this contract. So the Dodgers are not going to push this guy, to be very clear. He only threw 40 pitches and 49 pitches in his 2 spring outings. He threw fewer in the second outing than he did in the first outing. I really don't see him going past 65, 75 pitches on Wednesday, and I really think 65 is probably the safer estimate. And his splitter's fantastic. His slider's really nasty. We'll see where that fastball velocity sits. He should be very effective for the time he's in there, but I don't think he's going to be in there past the 4th inning. Maybe starts the 4th inning, gets an out in there, but the under 13.5 outs where it opened, I actually grabbed the 14.5 at one book. 13.5 I think is fine at about minus 110 or better on Sasaki. I saw minus 105 and minus 110. I do think he pitches through 4 innings and then they bring him out, especially considering you have an extra week now for that bullpen to rest after tomorrow. And the Dodgers didn't really use any of their relievers aggressively. I think the most pitches anybody threw was about 16 or 17. They had pretty easy, efforts through those innings today too. So yeah, Dodgers fully rested bullpen, extra week off. Sasaki low pitch count in spring. I think he's going to be great, but they're going to be very careful with him, especially early. So Sasaki under 14.5 outs, 13.5 outs. And I consider the under K prop as well. It's tough to gauge until we see, whether he's touching triple digits tomorrow.
So it sounds like you're leaning under for the game as well. And do you think there's value on the Cubs here if Sasaki is only pitching, let's call it 4 innings?
To a degree. So it's not just because Sasaki's pitching 4 innings. I think the uncertainty regarding Freddie Freeman is lending value to the line as well. Like I said, I project him as likelier to not play than to play at this point. I think I'd even put it closer to like 70-30 or 80-20 that he doesn't play as opposed to playing instead of like 55-45. So with that, I make the Cubs about plus 122 if Freddie plays, plus 112 if he doesn't. So I would bet them down to about, so I think I have them at plus 125 as my price target if he's in, and plus 120 if he doesn't. You can get plus 135 around the market right now. There's value regardless of whether he's in or out, in my opinion. The more narrow price target is in terms of the total. I make this total about 7.8 with him in, 7.69 with him out. Not a huge difference. The Dodgers swap offense coming out for defense going in when he's not in there. So I think with him out, I'm happy to bet the under 8 to minus 105. With him in, I wanted plus money. Like I said, I'm projecting him out. I think you could take 8 minus 105 for now. I just wouldn't go much past that. And it seems like the market is already getting to 8 minus 110. So it might be too late, even by the time this podcast airs. Again, like an awkward circumstance, early morning game. I fired the moment the game ended, the moment the Dodgers didn't have to use too many relievers, and the market was like right ready to go the moment that game ended as well. A number of books pulled their props down. They had 8.5s up, pulled them back down, put 8 back up. Other books had to steam those Justin Steele under outs props very quickly. But yeah, it's Cubs and under for me in game 2 after being Cubs and over in game 1. And Mike Estabrook, again, did knock that projected total down on top of Freddie Freeman being out, Mookie Betts being out, and then factoring in more aggressive bullpen usage in this game. So overall, I think we should continue to see good pitching. And, one guy like Ben Brown today can come in and mess things up for an inning. You may get one of that on both sides, but overall, getting new pitchers in and out constantly should suppress the run scoring.
With the Dodgers and Cubs being the only show in town, the only game in Major League Baseball for what I believe 10 days before we get to opening day across all of baseball. If you're looking for a bigger picture, you can go back through our podcast preview series, every single division, and we're going to hit you with a lightning round of Sean's best bets by division in just a moment. But first, March is the best month of the year, not just for sports, but also getting the best deal on Action Pro. Right now, you can get Action Pro for just over $5 a month for the entire year. And since it's March, that means the NCAA tournament. With an Action Pro account, you're going to get Sean Kerner's bracket simulations, Nick Giffin's player props, which were just on fire last March, Stuckey and other Action Networks picks 30 minutes before they go out to everyone else, and more. Plus, since it is an entire year of Action Pro, you'll be covered for baseball as well as the next college football and NFL seasons. So go to actionnetwork.com/March to get on board. All right, Sean, I teased it here. Let's go through division by division your favorite bets that are still available out there in the market for people to lock in before the season starts in earnest.
Yeah, AL East, Yankees to miss the playoffs. I discussed this on the show yesterday. I like that down to about plus 180 for now. I project it closer to plus 150. There's two different projections. Not Pacoda, Bad X. There's one other, could be Pacoda, that are both below 50%, have the Yankees at about plus 110 to make it. The highest projection has the Yankees at about minus 222 to make the playoffs. So that plus 240, even a small value compared to the most optimistic projection, and a substantial value compared to the average odds out there, which have them closer to 60% to make the playoffs. So Yankees to miss, plus 240, down to about plus 180. The AL Central, two angles I like. The Guardians to miss the playoffs at minus 145. I would take that up to minus 175, maybe even minus 200. Every projection has the Guardians at 23% or below to make the playoffs this season. The most optimistic projection is Pacoda at plus 340. You can lay them up to minus 175, as I said, to miss. And then the Tigers to win the division at plus 250. I'm the highest projection in the market on Detroit. I'm at plus 220 for them to win the Central. But Minnesota, Royce Lewis went down yesterday. I'm low on both the Guardians who do not have much upside, and the Royals who do not have much depth to replace any talent that they lose from their major league roster. I think the Tigers are the deepest team that still has upside within that division. I think they're also doing a great job in terms of player development, pitching development, all around. So Tigers trending up for 2025 after a phenomenal second half last season, plus 250 to win the division. I think some long shot pennant stabs are warranted as well. The AL West, the Rangers to win the AL West and also to secure a round one bye at plus 400. I like those to plus 150 and plus 350 respectively. Pacoda is near 50% on Texas to win the division. I'm closer to 40% at plus 150, but I'm fine betting them down to plus 150. And I also like them to make the playoffs at around minus 110 or better. I projected that closer to minus 175. And then if you want to take the ladder a step further, Rangers to win the AL pennant at 9-1 or better. The National League East, the Atlanta Braves are the value team for me, plus 140. Also, their round one bye at plus 195. The least optimistic projection has the Braves at plus 114, but the consensus is north of 60% and minus 150 on this team. So again, north of a 10% edge on the public projection or the public consensus relative to the listed odds out there. I would bet their divisional odds down to plus 110, bet that round one bye to plus 175, bet their World Series odds at 9-1 or better. I also project the Phillies as the fifth best team in the National League, behind the Mets, behind the Braves, behind the Dodgers, and behind the Arizona Diamondbacks. I like the Phillies under 91.5, down to 90. Phillies under 90 or better is one of my favorite remaining win total bets on the board. The NL Central, Brewers to miss the playoffs, very similar to the Guardians, just in terms of substantial bullpen usage last season, expected regression, both in terms of their bullpen, but also their offensive production this year. And also, the Brewers lost a key leader, contributor. I know we talked about mental stuff, not being able to handicap that, Mike. Willy Adames, by all accounts, one of the best clubhouse leaders in the sport, moving from Milwaukee to San Francisco. Yelich also coming back from an injury last year where he was playing well, got hurt again. We'll see what he looks like this season. Did hit a long home run in spring, but I think Christian Yelich's injury risk is going to continue to increase as he continues to age. I mean, he went through a number of down years, seemed like he finally got his skill level back last year, and then had another potentially crippling injury. So Christian Yelich worried about the health for 2025, but just see decline from the Brewers after aggressive bullpen usage last season. They really need some starting pitching depth in order to get through this year. And then finally, the NL West, Diamondbacks to make the playoffs at minus 115. Maybe my favorite bet overall. I love this Diamondbacks team. I project them as a very likely playoff team, have them north of minus 200 in my projection. Using the public projections out there, creating a composite, I make it closer to minus 160 on the average. So I think laying up to minus 130, even minus 140 or better on Arizona to make the playoffs. One of my favorite bets in terms of make or miss market, but just in general team props for 2025. And then just to recap, since I ran through all those, my bets for Cubs and Dodgers game 2, under down to 8 at minus 105. This is assuming Freeman isn't going to play. The Cubs at about plus 120 or better. And then the under outs props for both Roki Sasaki and Justin Steele. I'd take Steele under 14.5 to about minus 140. I would take Sasaki under 13.5 to about minus 110.
Sean, just incredible work top to bottom here on the Japanese series to kick off Major League Baseball. A special arigato to you and all the work that you've done. That'll do it for us in this episode of Payoff Pitch. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to tail some of the bets that Sean just laid out, look for the quick slip links in the episode description, either on podcast or over on YouTube. Don't forget to download the free award-winning Action Network app and leave us a 5-star rating review wherever you listen to the podcast. Also, check out the Action Network Discord. There's a link to join in the episode description of this podcast as well. We'll be back next week with a special episode with Sean Kerner talking strikeout props and the best bets for opening day. Can you believe it? Just a week away from opening day. Can't wait to get into it. Thanks again for listening and have a good one.